Hey there, Dave Paulides, Canammissing Project, a copyrighted edition for our video channel. And I appreciate you being here. My Twitter account, David Paulides at Canammissing. I post things there daily. And that's probably our #1 site that we all try to post to. Interesting articles and things, and you can follow our day-to-day thought pattern best there. Our primary website is canammissing.com. It's a missing person website. You can read up there. And thanks. So a couple of you have written in and asked for a talk about what kind of stuff we carry when we're out in the field. And it's a lot. One thing that I'm going to talk about today, just briefly, is night vision. So night vision is an instrument that allows you to look in the dark so that it appears that it's almost daytime. And the version of night vision, there's 4 versions that are available to the public. First edition is not very good. You can get it really cheap. Night vision, first edition, first version, not very good. I wouldn't even waste my money. Second version, a little better. Third version, better. And 4th version. Now, I'm not going to tell you what company makes this because I'm not paid to advertise for them, but I'll show you what it looks like. It's very small. And it works off 2 things. It can work off accumulated light, meaning light that the instrument itself accumulates from the surrounding sky, or it can generate its own light. It carries a CR123A battery that if you use it probably once a week, it'll last you a couple years. And then it has it's only a monocle. And when you look through the monocle here at this end, you have an end like this. You hold it up to your eyes and you can look through it. Now this version, the reason we got it is that it has a magnifier that we can put on the end, so it'll double the amount and the size of what you're looking at distance. Probably the most fun I've had with this is just looking at stars. Because when you look at the stars just regularly, you're probably seeing about 1/1000th that you'll see with this. And we started using this when we were in California. And I went to some locations that MUFON had recommended where you'll see some strange things in the sky, and son of a gun, this is it. You can't see it with your naked eye, but when you put this on and you put the magnifier on, you'll see things flying around that aren't satellites. They'll come across the sky, they'll stop, and they'll make a right-hand turn. They'll pulsate strangely. You just know it's not a satellite. And I've had friends over, and sometimes at night, if we're having a party or something, I'll pull this out and I'll just blow people's minds. Hey, what was that moving across way up with the stars? That's right. We can see this regularly with these. This is night vision. The fourth version, these can be anywhere from $5,000 to $12,000. They're really expensive. And you're really careful with it. Now, most recently, we had fun with this when we were filming our last movie, Missing 41100. We took it up when we spent 8 days at the Sierra Camp near Yosemite when we filmed our last movie. And there were a lot of weird things we saw in the sky. It was fun. And with this also, you can see things, animals and things that you'd never see far off in the distance moving on you. Now this is different from FLIR. FLIR is forward-looking infrared radar, which looks for heat, and it'll show up in different colors on your FLIR. And certain things show up on FLIR that won't show up on night vision, and vice versa. So different applications, different kinds of fun you can have with it, but it's definitely a tool for the serious-minded. But if you have interest in the stars, interested in night, unbelievably fun, and everyone wants to be looking through it. So that's tool number one, and every once in a while I'll bring a new one out so you can look at it, but this is probably one of the most popular ones we have. Now, if you remember, in the last video, I asked you guys, that's the village here, if anyone had heard about looking at somebody and seeing their face melt, or looking at somebody in a car and just having them disappear. Well, I guess you got to be careful what you wish for. You guys came through in a huge way. I'll never get through all the emails. There's probably 400 or 500 that people sent. I'm getting them all together. I'm getting some help with that and sending them to my friend. But I picked out some interesting ones that I wanted to read to you. Said, well, I've not ever seen this. I do know that if someone gets very deficient in vitamin D, other vitamins and minerals, that they can begin having schizophrenic symptoms. I don't know your friend's age or much more than what you've said in your video, but he may want to see his doctor and ask to have vitamin and mineral panel done on him. This will show if he's deficient in anything and may be the cause. Thank you. I never heard that before, but it's going to go to him. This came from a friend on Facebook. Responding to your friend who needs answers on the cars with the men whose faces melted away. So it just wasn't men, it was women as well. There are two stretches of highway where I've had a car behind me and it's gone away. One area is Highway 5 between North Avola and Blue River, British Columbia. The other one is on Highway 16 between McBride and Prince George, BC. One time it happened when traveling west for me. Also, that particular part of the trip, there's something that happens without fail every time. Time slows drastically to me. I look at the signs on the road that day, how far I've left to go a bit, and it always seems like I'm just not getting any close to what I should be. It's such a beautiful area around ancient forests, but it takes so much out of me every time. This has been a 26-year-long battle for me. I personally have not seen a face melt away, but I can't count how many times a car has disappeared with nowhere to turn off in those places. Thanks for that. Hi Dave, I just watched your episode this morning and almost dropped my phone when I heard about the man who saw melting faces. This happened to me about 3 months ago. I was looking at one of my girlfriends and her face just melted flat. It scared the heck out of me. I didn't say anything as to not scare her or make anyone else think I was going nuts. I've told my husband, who believes me, and now you. I just can't explain it. It just happened. Thanks for all you do. So you see, this is happening maybe a little more than we think. Hey Dave, as with you, your friend, I've had multiple times the experience of cars behind me with no known place to turn off be directly behind my vehicle, and after looking away a few seconds be gone. I've not had the experience of a driver melting away, but have been unnerved by an individual with a walker who stopped at my house for directions. We spoke. I made several trips back and forth from the driveway to my computer to try and locate the address he was looking for. He was talking to a friend on the phone who I guess gave him directions. It ended up that I drove my car to where the address was supposed to be while he followed me in his car. When we arrived at the address, I got out of my truck and into his car. We drove around in his vehicle but couldn't find any such address. At this point, we went back to my truck. I led the way to one other location off the main road where we might find the prayer meeting he was looking for. No success. We both went back out the fenced driveway at the same time. I turned left, he turned right. I pulled over to make a U-turn, and as I did, I noticed in my rearview mirror that I could not see his car on the road. The road is straight and flat for 2 miles with only one turn to the left. The road was also at the time open and flat, no trees, houses, or obstructions. I immediately got out of my truck and standing on the door frame could see no vehicle anywhere. I don't believe that his car could go a mile in 10 seconds. Life has some strange events that are not easily explained. I personally believe it is a spiritual world at work in an unhelpful way to distract from what is truly necessary, the bringing of light into darkness. Typical, these things do seem to happen when we are alone, remote, or in an unfamiliar location. Pretty weird. Pretty weird. Another one. First off, I would like to thank you for all you've done to help people. I have a few experiences I'd like to share. The first one was in a different area, and it's near Groveland, California. I've been fishing this stretch of the Tuolumne River for 40 years. This is an area kind of near Yosemite. It's private access, and the road down the canyon wall was built by the Chinese during the gold rush. Spectacular fishing. This is why we always return every year. This year we decided to go down for the April opener. This is something we don't normally do since the waters are usually too high and too cold for fly fishing. We live in the North Bay area and drove after work, arriving at about 8 to put our packs on and drop into the canyon. The sun was setting, and by the time we got to the bottom it was dark. It's about 2.5 miles, but 2,200 feet down. Near the bottom we stopped before the final drop, which is very steep, sat, drank some water. While sitting there, I watched this volleyball-sized ball of light going up the canyon. It appeared and flew upriver in an irregular line for about 75 to 80 yards and vanished. When this happened, I told my friend about it, and he proceeded to tell me he just saw another one going downstream. Then I say to him, "Dude, what the heck? Why didn't you say anything? This is so highly strange." We put our packs on and finished the drop to the campsite. We slept as we always do, no tents, under the stars. The next morning we decided to climb back up the trail and take the final 3/4 of a mile it takes you upriver. This was to save time versus climbing over rocks over the river edge. We reached the trail, and 50 yards into it, there's some digging on the uphill bank. I make a close inspection of it and can't find any claw marks from a bear or whatever. The area is dug out, was about 5 to 6 feet across and a foot or so down, so it was some pretty good excavation. I really wish I had photographed it. After we passed this, I stopped, and looking up the trail in the green April grass, there were footprints clearly visible. Not much larger than a man, but a lot wider. Further down the trail, we see these broken branches at about eye level, broken in the same direction, uphill. We stayed for 2 uneventful nights, caught some nice fish, and hiked back out. Another thing I noticed was strange branch placement in the trail when we came in at night. All of the branches were placed in line with the trail, in the middle of the trail, and all the broken ends pointed uphill. Every few years we bring tree saws with us to cut out limbs that overhang or block the trail that make backpacking difficult. Last year we really cleared out that thing. It's a bitch when your rod case gets hung up on the overhanging branches, especially when you're 65 years old. Next story. This is the 108 area. I don't know what that means. We have some friends that own a resort, what's left of it, called Dardanelle. It's almost to Kennedy Meadows along Highway 108. Okay. Now, this area was highlighted in Missing 411 The Hunted. And specifically, just a few miles down the road from this is Donnell's Vista, where 3 women have disappeared without a trace, no explanation, nothing. And then the Sierra Camp, this is really the area where we start backpacking in miles and miles and miles, very close to this. Last summer I took the family up there and we stayed at their place for almost a week. During the early mornings and late afternoons I would escape solo to fly fish. On the second night I was down where the Clark Fork merges with the Stanislaus River. It's not really a fair hike, but it's not close to the road. I lost a fly and was sitting down with my back to the river and retying another fly when I had a really overwhelming spell of heat and dizziness. I felt my hands and ears sort of buzzing. I stood up and looked around, but I didn't see anything unusual, but was still feeling somewhat unsteady on my feet. This bothered me, and to shake off this feeling, I went to the river's edge and splashed water on my face. Then I had this weird feeling that was not a familiar one. It was starting to get dark, so I hiked back to the truck and drove back to Dardanelle. We were staying in their cabin/hotel, and my 13-year-old daughter and her two friends at the same age had been running around all evening. It was getting late, 11 or so, and I was tired, so I bunked out with my wife. They are in the room next to us. Their room is at the end of the building. Around 1:30, the dog starts barking, and she's in bed with me. I sit up in bed, turn to look out the window, and see a super fast flash of a dark figure running by the trees in front of the cabin. What's weird is I don't really conceptualize this, as I was half asleep, and go outside and look around. I still remember seeing this though. I knock on the girls' door and tell them to call it quits for the night and go back to bed. The next morning I look around a bit, but I'm so focused on getting to the river. After we've been home for about 3 days, my daughter tells me what happened that night. They had gone out of their room to fill up their water containers at about 1 o'clock. When they were filling them, they heard a big branch break. All of them ran back in the cabin about 40 yards away, locked the door. She told me she heard something walk across the porch, then land with a thump at the end. Something was slowly scratching on the walls. All of them were so scared they locked themselves in the bathroom. They couldn't call us since the generator was turned off for the night. It's really strange she wouldn't tell me till the next day. However, they did want to go home that day. Lastly, this phenomenon became reality in my life. It's been all over the Sierra Nevada backpacking. I've been all over the Sierra Nevada backpacking for trout in distant lakes, creeks, and rivers, sometimes solo for weeks at a time. Outside of a few weird incidents on occasion, this subject never held any gravity with me. This was until 3 years ago. A man in a photo, a man and his son is a well-known athlete. He like a nephew to me. I know him better than any other young man his age due to my close relationship with his father. He was bear hunting with his friend in an area southeast of Calvello and shot a bear from fairly close range. Watched it drop and went to retrieve it. Crossing a low depression to get to the bear, when he got to where it was gone. Knowing he dropped the bear, they began looking for a blood trail. His friend Nick found the first splotch of blood and began following it. They described splotches of blood about 20 feet apart and moving uphill. After a half mile, they could not see any more blood. Then spotted the bear. It was stuffed in a contorted position, partially under a tree, with more branches covering it. As they started to uncover the bear, someone started throwing good-sized rocks at them from different directions. Thinking it was possibly growers or a cartel messing with them, they started to yell that they shot this bear and it belonged to them. The rock throwing stopped, and thinking they were going to take the bear and leave, they resumed uncovering the bear. Again, more rocks were thrown at them. They started to really freak out about it and left. Half a mile back at their quads, then 8 miles back to their camp. Back in camp, they started to cook dinner and have some beer, talking about what had happened. But now it was dark. As they were finishing dinner, someone began throwing rocks again. Still thinking they were being followed by a cartel, they began yelling that they were armed and they would start shooting if the rock throwing didn't stop. The rock throwing didn't stop, and they started shooting in all directions around them. Things died down for about 20 minutes, and then again more rocks started coming into the campsite. This time some big ones, and they could hear things moving around them. They never saw anything. They left and drove all the way back to Novato. Their dad called me that next day. The following day, I spoke with his son, and he had run into a ranger up there on his way back to retrieve their things. The ranger told him that's not a good place to hunt, and it's best not to go back up there, and that's why nobody hunts there. Needless to say, this is almost like my own son telling me this story, and it started me investigating ever since. Thanks, Dave. If you ever read the story, I appreciate it. Great story. Next story. Hi, Dave. I'm responding to your story about your friend that sees melting faces and disappearing cars. This is an account coming from my mom and what she told me about a year ago. Although she didn't mention disappearing cars, she did tell me a story of walking into Walmart where she was working at the time, and she looked at all the people passing by in their cars. Their faces began melting off. She quickly looked away, thinking it was just some weird stretch of her imagination or maybe eyesight. But as she looked back up at the person's face melted away too. Then the next and the next. Before she knew it, every person in the parking lot had melting faces. And underneath, she saw exposed bodies, muscles, blood, and skeleton. She said she could see into every person she looked at. Of course, this freaked her out, and I'm one of the only two she's ever told. She's a level-headed, 56-year-old woman that doesn't use alcohol or drugs and rarely uses a curse word. I can't remember quite how often the story ended and the details. I'd be happy to get more if you'd like. On a somber note, Dave, I can't find the words to express how unbelievable sorry I am about Ben. My fiancé committed suicide in 2016, and I have a young daughter suffering from depression. I actually played your video for her to show her what it's like to leave your parents in the wake of a suicide. So I can't imagine the pain you have had to bear. I can attest to the fact that my entire life has been affected by suicide forever, and I'm in awe of you and your bravery in showing the world your journey. Yeah, I appreciate that very much. And I'd like to say it's our journey. And more people than I can ever imagine have been on this journey, and that's the damn scary thing. Really scary. How many people have had to dig into their gut and pull themselves out? Okay, now just for the general letters. I have goosebumps writing to you right now. This may be kind of lengthy. My son, his girlfriend, and myself were talking about hunting season coming up. Been an avid hunter in Oregon my whole life. Through this conversation, I told her I don't like to hunt anymore or have someone go ahead of me or behind me to do the calls for the animals. She asked why. I explained an episode I had in 2015 in Ukiah, Oregon. I was hunting with my now ex-husband. He had went ahead to call and left me to sit and wait. He is out of my sight. He did some calling and then everything went silent. Not a bird, squirrel, nothing. It wasn't like him to stop calling to listen to see if an elk would answer back. But I mean, every sound in the forest stopped. I felt a presence. I felt heat on the back of my neck, almost like breath. Every hackle stood up. I just knew there was a cougar behind me. I knew it wouldn't be a bear because I would have heard it, but cats are quiet. This is the part of the story where I sound crazy. I heard a drum rhythm in my ears. It was not my heartbeat. I knew we were hunting next to an Indian reservation and a burial ground. So in my mind, I thought something weird about that for a minute. But when I was able to unfreeze my stance, I turned around fast, already had an arrow knocked, and thought for sure I would be trying to shoot at a cat. I didn't see anything. I scanned the trees, the brushes, looking for the face of the cougar, but what I saw freaked me out so much more. I saw a watery figure like a blob that was at least 8 to 9 feet tall. I blinked, trying to blink out water or an eye goober. But the sight was there. I looked at it for maybe 5 seconds and it moved, floated somehow to a tree, and seemed like it actually reached a blob of itself like an arm. I screamed for my husband and ran, and tripped through the bramble bushes. I got to him, told him the story, and he said I was exaggerated and crazy. Told a few people back home and pretty much got laughed at or told I was dehydrated. When my son's girlfriend jumped up and was freaked out and told me about your show. They had watched it, a story you did about a predator in Lima, Ohio. We both had goosebumps. I just watched the show and I had to write you, this happened to me. It's never left me and has altered where I go and how I hunt. Sorry, this is much a long message. I finally found a familiar story and I had to share mine. Thank you. So, in Missing 411, The Hunted, we did a story about a hunter who saw this predatory-like thing in a tree that went from one tree to another. You can watch Missing 411 The Hunted on YouTube Movies. Now, what was oddly attached to this sighting was simultaneously her nephew, the hunter's nephew, was at a high school very close at band practice, and the entire band saw a UFO hovering over the city. While this was happening, so you got the band practice, you got the glob in the tree. Very strange. Very strange. So the next story. Dave, not sure you'll ever see this message, but I felt the need to reach out to you, father to father. I'm new to your YouTube channel, but I've been interested in your work for some time. But my reason for reaching out today was your recent video posted on 9/11. I felt a compelling need to reach out to you and extend my most heartfelt condolences about the loss of your son. It's a loss like no other, and there are no words to describe the pain and loss I know you and your family feel right now. Unfortunately, as well, there are no adequate words to describe to others what you're going through. It's frustrating and unimaginable. My wife and I lost our youngest son, Luke, to an accidental overdose in June 11th of this year. Oh, jeez. Pain and sadness do not come close to describing this type of loss. It's a parent's worst nightmare, and you really can't comprehend it until it happens to you. Luke, like your son, also suffered from mental health issues for many years: depression, anxiety, and bipolar. We went years trying to get him the help he needed. Unfortunately, after many misdiagnoses and medications that just didn't help, he turned to self-medication and began abusing pills and alcohol in his late teen years. But thankfully, within the last year, we were able to get him in with a new team of very caring professionals that did get him the proper meds, and he was the Luke we hadn't seen in 10 years. Thank God you had him for a while. We were so thankful, and so was he. His life was finally looking up, and he was happy again, and had quit self-medicating. But the opioid addiction was too strong. And on June 11th, 2021, he bought one pill, a Roxy. Unfortunately, that one pill, we would later come to find out, had 9 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. No amount of life-saving measure, including Narcan, which was administered several times, could save his life. And we received that phone call that no parent ever should have to receive. I'm so sorry for the passing of your son. You and your family will be in our prayers. If you ever need someone to talk to, please reach out. My wife and I have been attending our weekly grief group. And while it won't remove any of your pain, it does help. Wow. Very sorry for your loss. And they're right. You just will never understand it. And I pray it doesn't happen to you till you lose a son or child, a son or daughter. Say one thing. When I was a policeman, the THC level in marijuana was very low, average between 1% and 4%. Nowadays, the THC level in marijuana is 10 times that amount sometimes, or more. And the way marijuana is now affecting brain cells and human disposition is much different than it was when I was a policeman. I've been spoken to by many physicians here on this channel about marijuana, and they've given me several studies. There's a lot of people out there that are self-medicating with this marijuana and believing that it's helping and believing that it's safe. Years ago, I used to think, and I probably still do, that 1% to 2% marijuana, 3%, wouldn't really do much to you. And I construed it always to be a pretty safe drug. But the studies I've read of marijuana in the last 3 to 5 years and their toxicity level to the system and the people that are trying to self-medicate with it, it's doing horrible things. And it's doing horrible things to the people that are on prescription pharmaceuticals and supplementing with this high-level THC marijuana. Be cautious. Be very cautious. And I worry about people that I know that are self-medicating with this and think they know everything there is to know about what it's doing to their body. And they aren't telling their psychiatrist what they're doing. So the interactions with the THC, with their psychiatric drugs, not good. Not good. And you're not giving the psychiatric drugs a fair chance at working. All right, on to the stories. I've talked about New Zealand several times in the past. There's a lot of reasons that country intrigues me. Not only it has great trout fishing. I've had friends that have gone there and said, Dave, you got to go. But it's an island. An island sits out there in the middle of this big ocean. Pretty close to Australia. And in an area that has a lot of odd issues going on. Well, on 9/11 of this year, a husband and 3 of his kids went missing there. And it's a very disturbing story. And I've had many people from New Zealand ask me if I'd cover it. And I said I would, and I will. But I want to preface this. The story is about a man named Tom Phillips and his 3 kids, Jayda, who was 8, Maverick, who is 6, and Ember, who is 5. And they lived in a city called Maricopa in New Zealand, very close to the ocean on a river. And he was a farmer. Now, he had gone through some type of marital issue and custody issue. And the police, surprisingly, would not broach that topic to the news, which I find strange. But everyone who said or talked about Tom said he was very protective of the kids. He was an outdoorsman. He knew being in the woods or being at the beach, there were dangers associated with that, and he took the precautions that were necessary. So let me first show you kind of where this was happening at. So here's Auckland, and this is where the family, the 3 kids and the husband disappeared, Maricopa. Now, there's a lot of things about New Zealand that mimic our West Coast. One of the big things is they have huge earthquakes here. And might just be a coincidence, I don't know, but I find it unusual. So, on the morning of 9/11, Tom's seen at the farm in Maricopa with his kids. And like what happens a lot of times, you take your kids for a ride, get them to see the countryside. Well, Tom had lived in New Zealand his whole life. And if you lived in New Zealand, you know that the waters around the country on those islands can get real rough and the beaches can become dangerous. Just a fact of life. One of the things I learned when I was 12 years old, I was really interested in scuba diving. And I was allowed to take a NAUI, N-A-U-I certification course at a college right near where we lived, at De Anza College. I was the youngest guy in the class, and I was probably the best swimmer at the time. But I became certified. And NAUI is, in my humble opinion, the best certification to get if you want to be a scuba diver, because you got to jump through a lot of hoops. But one of the things they taught me at that young age was never, ever, never turn your back on the ocean when you're around it, when you're going in, or you're coming out. I've written about several people who have disappeared in or around a beach near the ocean. Many. And there's always strange circumstances to it. Now, in Tom and his kids' case, what they did is they were living in Maricopa right here, and it was on the Maricopa River. And they had this farm here on this very good land. Well, on the day they disappeared, they drove down to the beach. You know, it's kind of a low tide, and you can drive down the beach, and they parked their vehicle. Nobody saw them park. Nobody saw them drive down there. Nobody saw anything, which is another odd thing. Now, this is a picture of his 2004 Toyota Helix. And if you look real careful, you can see that it was buried in the water up to about this depth when searchers, the family, came out the next day to look for him and found it in the water being hit by waves. They knew something was really wrong, obviously. So at about that time, they called the police. Actually, they called them the next morning because they found it late. And they started a 12-day search for the family. They started searching in the woods, and they started searching the ocean. But the weather was so rough that they couldn't get helicopters and planes in to look out in the ocean. Here's the family. This is Tom. The ocean was rough for the first 5-6 days. The final 6 days, they were able to get a helicopter and plane up. They said that the family isn't in their words, the bush. No bodies have washed ashore. No bodies have seen in the ocean. So you got to ask yourself on this case. I find it peculiar that the police won't comment about custody of the kids. They won't comment about the relationship between the husband and the mom. People did say that they saw Tom that morning at the farm and he acted completely normal, no issues, no nothing. Okay. If it was a family with no issues and they were living together, I would say this is very, very strange. But I have questions about the custody. And because the police aren't saying anything about it, and aren't saying anything about the relationship between the husband and wife on these custody issues, I suppose I have some concerns. It is very difficult to take out a whole family and an adult in one event like that, even by a rogue wave. Now, the kids are small, and the oldest one being 8. I could see, so supposedly Tom was in really good physical condition. Even him being taken out by a rogue wave and pulled out into the ocean, if you're caught, if you're surprised and not ready for it, it could kill you. And if they were in a tight group together, possible they were all taken out by a rogue wave. But I would suspect after this amount of time, almost 2+ weeks, that one of those bodies would have come ashore. Very strange. Very strange. I hope I'm completely wrong about all this. Some of the family members said, you know, well, we hope that they just went camping. Well, you need a vehicle to get to a place you're going to go camping, and that vehicle was on the beach. How it got into that position, why it was in that position, don't know, and nobody's given any answers. And to my friends in New Zealand, I hope you guys can come out of COVID protocol pretty soon and start to live your lives again. I've told you before that New Zealand had 1 case of COVID and they shut down the whole country. So, anyhow. Next case. I do want to give you one more look at this family. Fred and his family, a really good-looking group of kids. A deep compassion for the family that's alive and well and worrying about this group, wherever they might be. So, next case. So, it's a strange one. And what really got me on this next case was the passionate involvement by a family. Matthew Jordan was this young man's name, 20 years old. He's missing March 27th, 2015. He went to Teesside University in the United Kingdom. His major was criminal justice. He wanted to be a policeman. Well, while he was in college, he had 3 friends, some of them he'd been friends with for 15 years, lifelong friends. And they decided to go to this town called Windermere. And they were going to stay at a bed and breakfast. And then they were going to go out and just do some drinking at the local pub. So on March 26th, they arrived in the mid-afternoon, went out, had a few drinks, came back, had dinner. And then people in the UK are smart. We're not smart enough on this. But they took a cab from the bed and breakfast, because they knew they'd be drinking that night, down into the city to drink. Matt and his 3 buddies. So they went to a few pubs. Matt was drinking pretty heavy. And they were kind of bar jumping from place to place. And one of the places, the bouncer said, Matt can't come in, he's too intoxicated. So they went to another pub, they got him in. Matt told his buddies he was going to go to the bathroom, and they lost track of him. Apparently he went outside, and he vomited. And the bouncers kind of told him to move on. And he made his way at about 12:30 in the morning to a place called the Old England Hotel. Let me show you the progression here on a map. So what you have here is one of the biggest lakes in the UK called Windermere. Getting back to water again. And the young men were staying at a place called Orist Cottage. And this is the Old England Hotel. This is a downtown area they were drinking in. So the Old England Hotel, Matt tried to get a cab. There were none available to take him back to his place up here. And they gave him directions on a map, and he walked out. And they said he wasn't staggering. He'd had something to drink, they could tell, but he wasn't bloodily, stupidly drunk. Well, after he left that hotel, he wasn't seen again. And soon after that, his parents were told that he was missing, and here's a picture of Matt. And search and rescue started. He vanished sometime between 12:30 and 1 a.m. And what ensued was a 20-day search. Now, because it was near a lake, they put the UK police put divers in the water, and they put helicopters up, etc., etc. Well, after 20 days, they found Matt's body in the water. And divers found him deceased. Now, if you follow my research, you know that an unknown cause of death is one of the profile points we use. Guess what? Unknown cause of death. Now, they have an inquest in the UK for people who die. Now, one of the things that his mom talked about was that he was found in the water for 20 days, and the UK police told him that during this time, his phone was working, but his phone was found in the water. How is that possible? They said his body had been in the water a long time, but they didn't know how long. There was a small bruise on his nose near his forehead. There were no drugs in his system. They saying absolutely he did not drown. He did not fall from height. He didn't have a broken bone. And there wasn't enough alcohol in the system to kill him. The cause of death, they said, was accidental cold water immersion. At the inquest, the parents were upset. Why? So let's start with this. Remember I told you he was last seen at the Old England Hotel, and they gave him a map to get to his place he was spending the night. A canine unit from the police picked up the scent here and followed him to the front of a museum next to the water. They said that they went to the front door of the museum, and that's where the scent stopped. Multiple dogs picked up the scent and followed it to the museum as well, and they all stopped right at the front door. The parents at the first inquest were so mad because the coroners couldn't identify amount of time in the water, cause of death, where he was, if he was at that museum, where did he go afterwards, how did he get in the water? He wouldn't have just jumped in the water. He wasn't so intoxicated to be stupidly drunk. Parents brought up all these points. In Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence, I brought up all these points because this has happened at many countries. The UK, the US, Canada are the top three. And they're almost cookie cutter type cases. Almost all were men. Almost all had been drinking. The vast majority, they can't determine the cause of death. And there's a time span where there's that point of separation and something happens. They don't know how they get separated. They don't know where the people go. They don't know how they got in the water. And many times the amount of time in the water doesn't match the time it shows on the body in its deterioration. In Matthew Jordan's case, his parents deserve to be irate. But not at the police or the coroner, because they're looking at it from a purely regional standpoint. They've probably never handled a case like this before. They don't know that there are hundreds of these around the US, Canada, and the UK. And they think that there's just incompetence on the part of the police or the coroner. No. I've stated to you before, the coroners have contacted me from some of the biggest jurisdictions in the United States and have said that they have meetings and they routinely discuss these type of things. And what's frustrating to them is they have some of the smartest minds imaginable in science and scientists, and they can't figure out what's killing these people. So to the parents of Matthew, I feel your pain. You lost a good young man. And I hope that something from his death can contribute to solving this puzzle. And I don't say that lightly. I'd like to know where your son was during the entire time he was missing, but I just have a feeling he wasn't in the water. As I've stated many times before, water does a lot of things to the body. It washes things away. It puts microbes on the body. It accelerates some types of decomposition. And it's a good place to hide something for a period of time. So Mr. and Mrs. Jordan, I'm sorry for your loss. And just know you're not alone. Next case. During my travels, I worked for a number of years for a company out of British Columbia. And as I've said before, this company had technology for the mining industry, specifically diamond mines. And on one of my trips, I had to go to Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories of Canada. And it was one of the more amazing trips in my life. They wanted me to go in the middle of winter. I wouldn't go. I went in late spring. And Yellowknife, I was big into hockey then because Ben was playing. And I stopped by this giant rink they had there. I think they had 4 rinks going at the same time. And it's also the center point for Canadian diamond mines. People probably don't know that. So Canada advertises their diamonds as conflict-free. They aren't blood diamonds like they claim come from Africa. Diamonds coming from Canada are supposedly clean. And they are some phenomenal diamonds that come out of Canada. There's no doubt about it. So I went up there and I talked to some of the presidents of the mines and wanted to get them to understand how our technology worked. It was a successful trip. I enjoyed Yellowknife. I'd like to go back there in the summer and do some fishing because there's some fishing there that's outrageous, I've been told. But this story has to do with Yellowknife. And a young man by the name of Fred Van Duffelen. He's 26 years old. He went missing December 17th, 1978 from Holman, Holman in the Northwest Territory. Fred and his brother Michael were raised in Ottawa. Michael at the time was one of the photographers for the Northwest Territorial Government, and he was living in Yellowknife. Both the young men were hunters, outdoorsmen. They knew how to handle themselves, and that's the reason they were living in Yellowknife. They both loved it. Now, Holman is a very small island just off of Victoria Island in far Northwest Territory. Let me explain. Northwest Territory sits on the east side of the Yukon Territory. The Yukon Territory sits on the east side of Alaska. Now, that area of the north, to me, is just unbelievably gorgeous. And the company I was working for at the time, the owner of the company owned a large lodge up in the Yukon Territory. I don't mind telling you, he's a great guy. It's called Inconnu, I-N-C-O-N-N-U, Inconnu Lodge in the Yukon Territory. Fantastic fishing. I've been there 5 times, 6 times. A couple times on a business trip and just other times socially to fish. And I was flown multiple times into the Northwest Territory into a location called Cirque, C-I-R-Q-U-E, Cirque of the Untouchables. Look it up. And it's this giant valley in the northern part of the territories that is kind of like Yosemite Valley. It's just granite everywhere in this deep valley. And we went up there to do some maintenance on an outdoor toilet that they had built for the climbers that they flew in and out of there. And he says, "Hey Dave, do you mind spending the day with me?" I said, "Heck no, in the outdoors, let's go." So I went there and he and I worked on it for a day, and it was pure heaven. Weird thing is that this huge valley, every once in a while, this loud crack, I mean super loud. And way off in the distance, you'd see this giant piece of granite fall into the ground off the sides. And I thought, wow, I wouldn't want to be on that side of granite. It'd be deadly. But little marmots were running around everywhere. It was just unreal. So anyhow, getting back to the story. Fred Van Duffelen, living off of an island, Holman Island. So let me lay it out for you here. This is Alaska. This is Fairbanks right there, if you could barely see it. This is the boundary line. This is Dawson City. This is the Yukon Territory. And then this is the Northwest Territory. And it arches around, and it encompasses Victoria Island, part of it. And off of Victoria Island is a little tiny island called Holman. Holman is real close to Victoria, and in the winter months, it's all frozen. Everything's frozen up here. But during the summer months, there are more mosquitoes in this area of the world than I can ever begin to tell you. And they're the size of small birds. Just kidding. But they're huge, and they are everywhere. But anyhow, that's where Fred lived. And he owned a crafts store. And the city only had about 300 people, but other people would come from around the area to shop there Fred made a decent living. And he liked to hunt. And every once in a while, he'd take his motorbike or he'd take his snowmobile out into the bush and hunt. And one time several years ago, his snowmobile broke down and there was a search and rescue, and they found him like a day later and brought him back. Not unusual for this part of the country. On this incident, he left on December 17th, 78. He had a roommate, and they planned to go caribou hunting. So he wakes up at 4 in the morning, trying to wake up his buddy. He goes, it's too cold, I'm too tired, I don't want to go. Fred goes, okay, I'm going to take your snowmobile just in case, and I'll be back the day after tomorrow. Okay. So he takes off. Point of separation. Something happened there. So he left at 4 a.m. He brought his .243 Magnum rifle and a .22 rifle. .243 for big game, .22 for varmints. Well, when he didn't return, his roommate notifies RCMP, and they start searching, air and ground. He told the people and his roommate that he'd be about 10 miles north of Holman, following the caribou crew herd. But they kept searching out and out and out. They finally find his snowmobile about 30 miles out from where he said he would be. And they found both snowmobiles in the middle of Nowheresville. So they call in the troops, they send some snowmobiles in, and they found out that a small wire on his snowmobile had broke. And he set his snowmobile, and he was smart, he brought all of his survival gear, and what you do is you dig out the area underneath the snowmobile, and then that's where you stay until searchers come. And he had a foam pad and a blanket and a camp stove, and he lived there. Now, he was found, I think, 5 days after he disappeared. But nobody was at the site. Both of his rifles were there. Both snowmobiles were there. But he was nowhere to be found. And you think, where could he go? What could happen? He's not going to leave the warmth and the confines where he has food, warmth, water, warm blanket. Doesn't make any sense. This story was called The Great Arctic Mystery. Now, you're not going to find this story anywhere else. This is part of the original research we did on our books. And this is part of the frustrating part, because from my stories, everyone else would just copy them and claim that they did it. But the important part is what happened to Fred. And he was smart. He knew people would come looking for him because they had in the past, and his roommate would have called because he knew when he was supposed to be back. And in that part of the country, the First Nations people, like the Native Americans to us, they're called First Nations in Canada. The First Nations people took care of these other people in their community, like Fred. And nobody was going to allow another person to die out there. Very strange. One last thing to add about this search is what was phenomenal is in December months, they only have 2 hours of sunlight to search up that far north. And they still were able to find him. I don't think Fred would have left that area voluntarily. There was no place to go on foot. There were no tracks seen in the area. There had been snow flurries on and off between the time he left and the time he was found. So most of that area probably would have been covered up if he did walk out, but that's pure stupidity. You stay with your car, he knows that, stays with the snowmobiles. There's a big obstacle to see, keep the snow off them. Go down in your little hole and stay warm until the troops come. Fred Van Duffelen, 26 years old. And this is a picture of Fred. He's at work. Described as a really good guy, loved the Inuit people, loved his community. Very strange case. Well, covered some ground here today, and hopefully you appreciated it. So we got the Tom Phillips family. Tom and 3 kids disappeared from New Zealand. You got Matthew Jordan, 20, who disappeared from the UK and was found, unknown cause of death, suspicious circumstances. You got Fred Van Duffelen, who disappeared from the Northwest Territories. These cases are all around the world, and you just got to be persistent in understanding what you're looking for. In Fred's case, obviously water, frozen ice everywhere. No tracks anywhere. Weather inhibited the search, etc. I mean, I could go on, but unusual. I greatly appreciate you being here. Please give the video 2 thumbs up. As long as YouTube's willing, I'll be back next week. Be safe. Please tell people to watch our channel. A gift for anybody you know who's an outdoorsman, get them a personal locator beacon. It will save lives. Thanks again for tuning in. See you soon.